In the early hours of the 8th of July 2015, a man was travelling along Sandy Run Road, which is in Hampton County, South Carolina, and he came upon what appeared to be a body lying there in the road. A little bit concerned for his own safety, that there might be a killer out there, a shooter, for example. The man travelled a little ways down the road, and then he stopped and called 911. I'm playing this clip from the excellent channel by Eric Allen, and this is part of the 911 call made at that time.
Hampton County 911, where's your emergency?
Hell, I see somebody laying out in the road. Somebody going in this dark. Somebody going in.
That call went in to Hampton County Sheriff's Office. They investigated, and yes indeed, it was a body of a young man aged 19 lying dead in the road. That was Stephen Smith. In this video, we're going to investigate the tragic death of Stephen Smith, which at the time was ruled a hit and run. The South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, or SLED, have now declared that Stephen's death is going to be investigated as a homicide. Let's get into how the case unfolded, the theories surrounding the case, and what's going to happen next. This is a harrowing story. Stephen's family have been waiting for answers since July 2015, and I believe this is just the beginning of the journey to get justice for Stephen. I'm going to be playing clips from Eric Allen's channel, and I'll leave a link to his channel in the description box. There's some really in-depth investigations there that Eric's done himself. He lives in the area, he lives in Beaufort, which is a few miles away from where Stephen died. The Murdaughs at the time were big shots in the area. Pretty much what they said went. They had fingers in so many pies. If a Murdaugh was connected to the death of Stephen Smith, that's one reason why this death might not have been fully investigated at the time. I'm going to be playing you some clips also from Court TV, from an excellent piece they did a couple of days ago, where Sandy Smith, Stephen's mother, spoke very candidly about the situation. Let's get into this story.
So that night, who was there? Are there any Murdaughs at the scene where Stephen's body is found that night?
When they removed his body from the road, and that was about 9:30, I seen me and my daughter and my son, Chris, seen Alex and Randy Murdaugh at the scene. And as we were on our way to the funeral home to make arrangements, and that's when Randy Murdaugh called and said, "Was that you that just passed by?" And I said, "Yeah, we just passed by." And he said, "Well, I wish you would have stopped so I could have met you."
At this point, let's just stop a minute and talk a little bit about the Murdaugh family. So the Murdaugh family are prominent in the Low Country region of South Carolina. Going back almost 100 years, 3 generations of men called Randolph Murdaugh served consecutively as the circuit solicitor, so that's an elected prosecuting attorney, for the state's 14th Judicial District between 1920 and 2006. The family's status has led locals to call the 5-county district of the 14th Judicial District Murdaugh Country. Randolph Murdaugh Sr. founded the civil litigation firm that is now Parker Law Group, which now specialises in personal injury litigation. Randolph Murdaugh Sr. was born in Varnville in 1887, the youngest son of Josiah Putnam Murdaugh II, a wealthy Low Country businessman. His maternal grandfather, Joseph W. Davis, was a cousin of Confederate President Jefferson Davis. Randolph Murdaugh Sr. attended the U.S. Naval Academy and graduated from the University of South Carolina Law School in 1910. After graduation, he founded a one-man firm in Hampton, 78 miles west of Charleston. He had 2 sons, Randolph, or Buster, Murdaugh Jr., and John Murdaugh. He ran a local daily newspaper, the Hampton County Herald. In 1920, he became solicitor in the 14th Judicial District. He held the position until 1940, when he was killed in a collision between his car and a freight train. His car crashed into a Charleston and Western Carolina freight train at a grade crossing about 5 miles south of Varnville. Now, Randolph Murdaugh Jr., known as Buster, succeeded his father, and he served as solicitor from 1940 all the way up to 1986. In his 46 years in office, Buster ran opposed only twice. A few months after the death of his father, Buster sued the railroad, claiming that poor maintenance of the rail crossing had contributed to the accident. Although there was speculation that the crash was no accident, with some believing that Murdaugh Sr. intentionally stopped his car on the tracks to commit suicide, or that the crash was alcohol related, the railroad settled the lawsuit for an undisclosed sum. Buster was a controversial figure in the local community, but his courtroom prowess and his flair for acting out murders before spellbound juries made him very successful. But, according to Professor John Bloom of Cornell Law School, he was rebuked several times by the state Supreme Court for improper closing arguments in death penalty cases, and for arguing in a rape case that if the defendant was acquitted, he would release other accused rapists. In 1956, he was indicted by a federal grand jury for allegedly warning a bootlegger to move moonshine into a neighbouring county to avoid the revenuers. He was acquitted of that though. Buster retired in 1986 and was succeeded as solicitor by his son Randolph Murdaugh III, and held office until retiring in 2006. Randolph and his wife Elizabeth had 4 children, including 3 sons. Randolph IV, known as Randy, and we'll hear about Randy much more in this story, and Richard Alexander, called Alec Murdaugh, both of whom entered the family law firm. Randolph III died of natural causes on June 10th, 2021. Just 3 days after the murders of Maggie Murdaugh and Paul Murdaugh, Randolph III's grandson. Maggie Murdaugh was the wife of Richard Alexander Murdaugh, or Alec. Alec and Maggie had 2 sons, Buster and Paul. Just recently, as many of you might know, Alec stood trial for Paul and Maggie's murders and was convicted to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. This has disgraced the Murdaugh family. However, they are still standing strong. Randy Murdaugh and Buster Murdaugh are both relevant to the story of the tragic death of Stephen Smith.
Steve, when Joel was at the sheriff's department, him and Stephanie were at the sheriff's department, I was on the phone with Joel, and Joel said, "Hold on, Randy Murdaugh's calling." And so he said, "That was strange." And I said, "What was it?" He said, "Randy Murdaugh called and wants to help with Stephen's investigation." And I'm like, "What investigation?" Well, at that time they changed it so many times, but at that time we didn't know exactly what happened. Because after Joel got off the phone and got back on the phone with me, T.C. Smalls walked out and said, "I'm sorry to tell you, but that was your son, and he's been shot."
Whoa.
So let's clarify what Sandy Smith, Stephen's mother, is telling Vinnie from Court TV here. Stephen was found in the road, lying there with a severe head injury. Although we haven't seen the autopsy report of Stephen Smith, what we've heard is a severe injury to the back of his head, which was originally thought to be a gunshot, and a few scrapes on his body, but no other significant injuries. Sandy tells Vinny that at 9:30 a.m, after the body had been removed, Sandy and her family went to the scene, and there stood Alec Murdaugh and Randy Murdaugh, both prominent lawyers at the time in the area. A little later, when Stephen's dad, Joel, and his sister, Stephanie, were at the sheriff's office, Randy called Joel and asked if he could assist with the investigation. Now, at this time, the family had absolutely no idea what had happened. And they were like, well, what investigation? We don't know what on earth's going on. T.C. Smalls, who was the sheriff at the time, believed that Stephen had been shot in the head. This is a murder. But things didn't turn out that way. Why did Randy Murdaugh want to assist the Smiths in this investigation? Was it because he was expecting to be able to, bag the case, get some money for his law firm? Maybe that's all it is. Prominent lawyers in the area see this tragedy and want to cash in on it. Maybe. Or is there more to it than that? Because the way things unfolded become very, very, very suspicious. In fact, one Murdaugh, the son of Alec Murdaugh, the nephew of Randy Murdaugh, Buster Murdaugh, has been implicated in the death of Stephen Smith. He has, in the last few days, come out and vehemently denied these claims, saying he's been trying to ignore them because he's grieving the loss of his mother and his brother. But his mother and his brother only were murdered, shot to death by Buster's dad Alec on June 7th, 2021. Stephen's death happened in July 2015. But I guess that with all of the publicity, the international publicity surrounding Alec Murdaugh and, Buster's immediate family, he's coming under a lot of heat now. Because in 2015, Stephen's case wasn't well known at all. It would have been very easy to brush it under the rug. So is Buster having to come out now because of all of this attention? Yeah, maybe. Maybe he didn't have to do it before because it wasn't a well-known case. So how is Buster implicated in the death of Stephen Smith?
Before that night, had you ever had interaction with anyone from the Murdaugh family? Number one, had Stephen ever mentioned anything about any Murdaughs?
No. I really didn't know them. I know when Stephen was in recreational baseball, Alex and Mr. Randolph were the coaches. And I never met Randy, John. I never met anybody else from the Murdaugh family. But, I've seen Buster at some school functions and stuff when we had to go to school. And at Stephen and Stephanie's graduation, he graduated with them, so...
Stephen and Buster went to the same high school and graduated in the same year. They moved in different circles of friends, but they did know each other. Now, in one of the videos that Eric Allen did, investigating the case of Stephen Smith, he played some interviews between young people in the community and law enforcement officials. The name Buster Murdaugh came up when Stephen's sister, whose name's been changed in Eric's video, heard from someone that it was Buster Murdaugh that did it, or at least Buster Murdaugh was implicated in it. And I'm going to play you some of those clips now. What I think it's important to appreciate is law enforcement couldn't quite get to the bottom of where these rumours had originated from. It seemed that lots of young people knew about these rumours, but it was all hearsay. And if you know anything about criminal investigations, you'll know that hearsay, without knowing the actual source, isn't very much use in a court of law.
I just left the house the first official time yesterday.
Yes, ma'am.
And I went into the store, and a bunch of people kept coming up to me, and they're like, did you know the Murdaugh boys are behind it? You know, saying Buster Murdaugh, the one we went to school with, did it, and some of his friends.
The officer asked where she heard this rumor from and does his best to trace it to the source.
That she was at church and that both of y'all had spoken about Stephen's death, about Buster Murdaugh. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. I told her that another friend of mine had texted me asking me if Buster and Stephen were together, and I told him no. I said, not that I knew of, and then I asked him why. He said because he had heard that, and then I asked him who he heard it from, and he said he didn't know, he just heard it.
Was that message from?
It was from, yes.
Okay. Have you got his phone number?
And she wasn't the only person who heard it from Michael.
I heard that 2, maybe 3 young men were in a vehicle. They were riding down 601, saw the car on the side of the road. I guess saw the boy walking. They turned back around. I guess they were attempting to, mess around with him or something like that, and stuck something out the window, and it, hit him in, I don't know if it hit him in the head or the back or where it hit him. And then that's pretty much all I heard. I did hear names, and I heard a name, and that name was, he goes by Buster Murdaugh. I've known Buster pretty much my whole life. He's a great under me. We went to school together, played baseball together.
So, because Stephen's body had been found in the road, Sandy Run Road, Hampton County Sheriff's Office brought in South Carolina's Highway Patrol Division to assist them in the investigation. So the Highway Patrol guys went to the scene, and this is a long stretch of road. Visibility would be good, although if this had been a road traffic collision occurring at night, this is a quiet rural area, no ambient lighting from the environment. The visibility would be headlights only. So could this have been the case of Stephen walking down the road trying to get assistance and had been hit by a vehicle who then left the scene? Yeah, in theory it could be. What is believed to have happened is that Stephen broke down and he'd left his vehicle by the side of a road, but where his body was found was several miles away. His mother, Sandy, says that if it's broken down, Stephen had his phone. In fact, his phone was on his person when he was found in the road. He would have called for assistance, as he'd done on previous occasions. He would have called his sister. He didn't like being out on his own. His mother said she thought that if he'd broken down, he would have just sat in the woods and waited for someone to come and get him. Now, this was a rural area, so is it possible that Stephen didn't have a signal? He attempted to walk a ways to go home or to a place where he could get a signal. Don't know, because Stephen's full phone records were never investigated. However, Stephen had made calls. What the highway guys quickly recognised is this did not look like a road traffic collision. There was no car parts of any type. If Stephen had been hit by a car whilst walking along the road, there would have been debris, a bumper, a mirror. One of the theories was that the damage to the back of his head was caused by a mirror hitting him. But wouldn't the mirror have broken off the vehicle? Wouldn't the mirror have shattered and be in the road? There was none of that. There was Stephen's body, some blood, and nothing else. No debris. Now, some of you will know this, but my son was killed by a dangerous driver who was a hit and run. My son was 21 years old, and he was struck in the road. Very similar circumstances to that of Stephen, actually. A long straight road with reasonable visibility, but at night, so headlights only visibility. But my son's death was a scene. And when I say a scene, I mean a scene. The damage to his body was catastrophic. when the family liaison officer came to see me with the autopsy results and he read them out to me, my son had had catastrophic injuries to the back of his head, his spine, which would have resulted in instant death. He was hit from behind. And his body was dragged, and I mean dragged, under that vehicle for quite a number of yards from around this gated area, and his body came to rest near this bench, which we've now called Reese's bench and Reese's lamppost. That's a long way to be dragged, but if what the medical examiner assumed is correct, the catastrophic injuries to his head and his spine would have resulted in instant death, and he would have been dead whilst he was dragged along the road. And there were car parts everywhere. In fact, the killer left the scene, but he was found several hours later because his vehicle had been parked by the side of the road, and it was a mess. There was debris all over. In fact, my son being dragged under that vehicle had resulted in a radiator leak, and that's how they knew the path of the vehicle, the path that the vehicle had taken, as it drove past him, did a U-turn and drove back to go home via a different route, trying not to be caught on CCTV, presumably. None of that occurred in Stephen's case. If this was a road traffic collision, this is the cleanest road traffic collision I have ever heard of. The lead investigator in my son's case, him and I had a very candid conversation one day, and this was quite at the beginning of the investigation when I was trying to understand what had happened. And I said, was he thrown? Because sometimes if you're hit by a vehicle, you're thrown over the vehicle. And he said, no. Actually, when it's a grown man, you tend to get dragged under the vehicle rather than be thrown. A child might get thrown because they're a lighter weight. It does depend. It depends how that vehicle strikes you, and there's a variety of, variables that could come into play. But my son was dragged under. So in Stephen's case, had he been hit and thrown, not by the positioning of his body. And if he'd been thrown over the vehicle, you would have expected catastrophic injuries, not just a few scrapes, not just an injury to the head, which appeared to the sheriff and the coroner in the first instance to be a gunshot wound. It turned out that it wasn't a gunshot wound. There's no sign of a bullet, there's no sign of residue, so the gunshot theory was quickly discounted. And it was then thought that he'd been hit by a blunt instrument, such as a baseball bat. Now, the pathologist, Dr. Erin Presnell, who conducted the autopsy, her findings confused matters even further. And I'll read you a little bit from the Highway Patrol report of them trying to make sense of what the pathologist had said. So, the reason I went and spoke with her, the pathologist, was due to a preliminary report where she stated that the victim was possibly struck by a motor vehicle mirror, which was the cause of death. Sergeant Moore had already had, from my understanding, a heated conversation with her about this issue. The team had always had a good working relationship with the medical examiner's office, so I wanted to see if I could go down there and get some sort of clarification. As soon as Dr. Presnell came into the room, she began in a negative tone stating that I did not have a meeting scheduled and that she was very busy. She stated that she could not even begin speaking with me about this case without the coroner's consent. I advised her that I had spoken with the coroner the day before, and she basically called me a liar, saying that she would call him right away. When I asked if she wanted me to call from my cell phone, she backed off. I asked her why she stated that in her report, and her answer was, because he was found in the road. She had no evidence other than that for the statement being put in the report. So this pathologist had concluded that Stephen's death was due to a road traffic collision because he was found in the road. Now, the highway patrol guys knew that this was nonsense. This did not look like a road traffic collision to them. But yet, this was all brushed under the rug. So where do we go from here? And how does Buster Murdaugh fit into all of this? Well, some of the young people in the community that knew Buster Murdaugh had heard rumours that Buster and Stephen were in some kind of relationship. Now, Stephen was openly gay and people generally didn't have a problem with that. But there's no evidence to suggest that Stephen and Buster had actually been in a relationship. This could just have been a rumour. But whether or not they were in a relationship becomes a moot point when we think about, well, how did Stephen come to die and his body deposited in the middle of a deserted road with a severe injury to the back of his head that could have been caused by a baseball bat? So, law enforcement continued to investigate, and they came upon this person called Xavier, who, in my opinion, seems a little bit shady.
2 months later, an anonymous tip comes in that Xavier, along with another black male and a white male, Buster, are the ones involved in Stephen's death.
Somebody said he got hit by a car or something. That's what you heard. Yeah, I didn't get hit by a car. He did? That someone murdered him. That's what I'm saying. For what? Why would somebody do that to him? I have no idea. He wouldn't bother nobody, I don't think. Because he was out, when I played football, he was out training. I mean, I'm seeing him every now and then in school, but other than that, I didn't ever see him. Sure, it's more some kids with the last name Murdaugh. I know a girl, but you had the boys. It wasn't too many, well, one, he graduated with Steve. Right. You hang out with him? Never did. Did you ever go to any of his parties at any time? No, sir. Well, here's the thing. You know, your name's been brought up as a link in this death. So, I mean, if there's anything that you want to say about it, you know, I'd hate to see you go down with whoever killed this boy. Huh? I wasn't there. Didn't know about it until the day after he died. I heard he was hit by a car. That was it. Yeah. No, he wasn't.
So who is Xavier? How is he connected to Buster? And are there any other explanations other than Buster? Well, it seems that there is, and perhaps that's something that we can explore in the next video on this case. So I'm going to leave it there for today. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Obviously, as always, everyone is innocent till proven guilty in a court of law, and all we're doing here is theorising and speculating. Let me know what you think. It's goodbye from Miss Tillington and Miss Cassie Springer. Bye, guys.